I'm Jonathan Katz-Moses, and I have a saw problem. Today on our Essential Skills series, I wanted to talk to you about Japanese pull saws. The reason that I prefer Japanese pull saws is for a couple reasons. One, I believe they're easier to use. When you cut on the pull stroke, the saw does not bind like it does on the push stroke. Sometimes when you're cutting with a Western saw, the blade will bind in your kerf, and it's a little bit tougher when you're starting out. But then once you start using a Japanese saw, you find that the blades are much thinner. You get a much thinner kerf, which means your mistakes are much less noticeable, and I feel like I can get a lot more done with a Japanese saw as compared to a Western saw. Most of the saws on my wall here are from a company named Suzanne. It's a Japanese company. They make the saws in Japan. They did not sponsor this video. I did not get paid for any of this. I just really am that addicted to Japanese pull saws. The other reason that I really like them is they have much higher backs. Western saws sometimes have a back that's as low as 3/4 of an inch, and obviously I use a dovetail jig because I make one, and you get a lot deeper dovetail cut with the higher that the back is on your saw. We're going to take you into the bench and talk about these in a little bit more detail, but basically we have our Ryobas here. They have these folding dovetail and Ryoba that I think are just the coolest thing in the world. It adds a lot more weight and stiffness to it, which is sort of counterintuitive, but the extra weight I feel like really makes cutting even easier. Then after the Ryobas here, I have 3 Ryobas, and then this is a Catawba, which is for rough dimensioning. This is something you would use when you're trying to chop up bigger pieces of wood and you need to make, cuts that go deeper than the saw. And then I have my dovetail saws here. I have a folding one, a 6-inch dovetail saw. They make an 8-inch dovetail saw that has what they claim to be the thinnest blade on the market, and it really is thin. And then there's a 9.5-inch dovetail saw, which I love. They have a flush cut saw. This is a Ryoba style flush cut saw that is actually handmade in Japan. I don't use this that often because I love it so much, but I got this in Atlanta when I was at the woodworking fair, and it's really, really a beautiful piece of work. And then I have some other flush cut saws here. This is a panel saw. This is from a different company. I use this to separate out my CNC dovetail boards, and a bunch of teeth are gone on it. One of the things about Japanese saws is you don't want to use it on pressed wood like plywood or MDF because it has a tendency to blow out the teeth. You'll see reviews on Amazon for Japanese saws and say, oh, I ripped out the teeth, but that's because they were cutting something they shouldn't have. The other great thing about Japanese saws is you can just replace the blade, or you can even just get a new one. I think usually they're 30 to 50 bucks a piece, and the blades are 20 to 35 bucks a piece. So really you could just get a new saw if you wanted to spend just a couple more bucks. So they're very cost effective, and honestly I think they're a lot better than Western saws. So let's go into the bench and I'll show you how they work. So these are Ryoba saws. This is a folding Ryoba and then a fixed Ryoba, and you can just replace the blade by loosening this nut right here. But the way that they work is they have 2 sets of teeth, which is great about Ryobas. It's like you're getting 2 saws in one. So this is the crosscut side. You have more teeth because you're cutting across the grain, so you need to sever more fibers. And then you have rip teeth, which are for rip cutting, and that is going along the grain this way, and so it takes less work to do that. So it has bigger teeth so that you're faster when cutting. Now, these are the saws that I use for most everything except for cutting dovetails. Dovetails, I'll show you that in a second. But the best thing about Japanese saws, one of the great things about Japanese saws, is this little piece right here. I did a video, I'll link it right here, about a handsaw trick that everybody should know, but this is a depth gauge. So this last tooth is exactly level with that straight line there. And so when you get down to a certain depth, you can place your flat part here and then cut across, and that'll help you make sure the entire cut is down to the same depth without cutting any further. So that's on all Japanese saws. That is really neat. Let me show you how I use one of these. The way that a Japanese saw works, this is the Ryoba again, is you want to start and put your thumb and hold the saw blade right where you want it. And sometimes I like to do just a little bit of a backwards push, and that'll create just a little bit of a curve for you. And then you start cutting. And when you're cutting, with a Ryoba, you can use 1 or 2 hands, and I just look for the reflection in the saw. You don't want that board to look like it's not a straight line. If it's a perfectly straight reflection, it's going to give you a really straight cut. And you pull towards you, you let the saw do the work. You don't push down in any way, otherwise your saw is going to just start to go. So I start going, I look straight down the middle of the saw here, and kind of peeking at the reflection on both sides, making sure that that is a straight line. And I'll blow the dust away, make sure that I'm still going into the line. And I'll just keep going, ensuring that I'm still in the line. And you want to think about sawing and your sawing technique like you're shooting pool. When you're shooting pool, you use your back arm as a pendulum. And you want your arms to move forward and backwards in the exact same way. So I just keep working down that line. I'm also checking the line that goes down the board here. And I'm letting the saw do the work. And you'll hear it, it's just about to finish here. And I slow down so I don't slam the teeth into the workbench when I cut it. And there we go. And then if we look at that with a square, that is a damn near square cut there. And then I would just take this over to my shooting board and just get that a little bit more square. But that's how you cut with a Japanese saw. So let's talk about dovetail saws. These are dovetail saws. They're different sizes and thicknesses. These two are about the same, but this one comes in folding, which I really like the heft of, as I was saying earlier, and the back seems to be very stiff. So I really like these folding saws. And then this is their standard 9.5 inch Japanese saw. Both of these use the same blade, which is 25 teeth per inch, and it's 0.012 thick, the blade, and the kerf is 0.016. Then they have this really cool ultra thin 8-inch dozuki, which dozuki is a dovetail saw. This is 8 thou thin, and then the kerf is 0.012. And these are great unless you're going really deep. For very shallow cuts where you need a super fine cut, these are awesome. But when you start to get shallow, they're so thin that it can tend to wander on you a little bit. And then this is a 6-inch dovetail saw, which has the same thicknesses as these 9.5 inches, but it's just smaller and kind of easy to use in small places. I like to use the bigger ones a little bit better because I feel like I have more control over it going straight. But these are great in kind of smaller situations. Dovetail saws, these are the ones I use with my Katz-Moses magnetic dovetail jig. And it's great because you can get almost a full 1.25 inches below the sawback depth in your dovetails. Now, dovetail saws have what look like crosscut teeth, even though you're making a rip cut, because you need it to be very, very fine and the kerf of your dovetail saw to be very, very thin. So I usually stick with the standard 9.5 inch dovetail saws, but when I want to do really, really thin, fine, teeny dovetails, I will use the 8-inch super thin one. But if you could only pick one, go with the 9.5, either the folding or the standard one. The handles on these, this one is kind of a rubber polyurethane. It feels great in the hand. The 9.5 inch comes with a very short katana wrap, I believe it's called. It's a type of cane. And these are great. They last forever, and they're all natural. It's plant-based, so it's kind of cool. It feels good in the hand, and it's sort of a neat thing that this is actually real cane. These are all, like I said, made in Japan. Great saws. Let me show you how I make a cut with them. So as with any time you're cutting dovetails, I would just use a marking knife. And I really want to show you the difference in size of kerf between the 9.5 inch and the 8 inch, so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. So we'll do them very close together here. And again, the way that I start my dovetail saw is I take my thumb, I put it right in that line, and I kind of angle it the way that I'm going to go with my dovetail. I do a little bit of a backward stroke, and then I'll just slide my dovetail jig up to it. And then just same kind of thing. You want to use that same motion. Let it do the cutting for you. And just cut down to your line. And this is where that trick I was telling you about the end of the saw works great, because in dovetails, sometimes people will kind of get down to their line and then get down to their line, and they end up with a little hump in the middle. So what I like to do when I reach the end of my dovetails is I'll put that little flat part at the bottom here and just do a little sawing, make sure everything's cleaned out of there. And then I move on to my other tails. Now, I want to show you the difference in thickness of the ultra thin, the 8 inch. Start it the same way, and that almost fits in your marking knife line. It almost is like you've already created a curve for it. But again, same thing, just let the saw do the work. And you can see the difference in thickness if you look at the sidewall here. And it's because my marking knife was actually wider than the saw, but you can see the difference in thickness here. The one on the left is the 8-inch ultra thin, and then this is the 9.5-inch dovetail dozuki. So you can see how much thinner that is. But again, this is probably as far deep as I would ever want to go with this. One, because it has a shorter back, but two, you know, like I said, they can get a little wandery on you if you go too deep with these. So let's talk about the Catawba and flush cut saws. So these are the flush trim saws I have, and this is the Catawba. The Catawba is an aggressive tooth. It's 14 teeth per inch, and it's designed for me. I use it for rough dimensioning when I just need to chop a piece off quick, because it's much longer. It sort of has a slight curve to it, and with the aggressive teeth, it's a very, very fast cutter. In fact, I'll show you. So I love this thing. I use it a lot when I don't want to take the time to find an extension cord and plug my circular saw in. I'll just do this to get a piece real quick. And then these are my flush trim saws. This, again, like I was telling you, is my handmade one that I bought in Atlanta by a Japanese artist, I'm not sure who. But flush trim saws have no tooth set. So you can take its very thin blade and put it flat on a surface and cut off things without scratching your surface. Like there are no scratches in my bench here. And it's for flush cutting. I kind of don't use this one very often because I love it so much, and I don't want to hurt it. This one is by the same company, Suzanne. You can see the blade is like ultra thin, and because of that, these blades are very, very cheap to replace. I've pulled out a couple teeth, but that happens. But they have no tooth set, and you can just rip through things when you need a flush cut. And I mean, they're real easy to use. It's so much easier than using a Ryoba, which I've seen people to flush cut with, because Ryobas have tooth sets, so you're going to scratch your workpiece when you're using it. So these are great. So that's kind of the basics of Japanese saws. I really prefer them over to Western saws because they're more cost effective. The blades are replaceable. They're thinner, and I feel like for the money you can get a lot more options. I mean, you know, this is only a couple $100 worth of saws. I use all of them. I do have a doubles of a couple, but you know, I like Japanese saws. So go out and pick yourself up one. I'll leave links down to these in the description. They're great saws made in Japan. And like I said, this is not sponsored. This is just my honest opinion. So thanks for watching, guys. Stay safe in the shop and have a wonderful day.